Welcome to Chatting the Pictures. My name is Cara Finnegan, and I'm a writer, teacher, and historian of photography.
And I'm Michael Shaw. I'm a writer, a psychologist, and also publisher of Reading the Pictures.
Protest continues to dominate the news.
Today we're looking at a photo by Caitlin Ochs for Reuters. In the photo we see women from a group called the Wall of Moms demonstrating outside the Federal Justice Center in Portland during a racial justice protest. The presence of federal troops has sparked outrage and swelled participation in demonstrations in the city as protests for racial equality have swept the country. Cara, what are we looking at here? Is this an anomaly where Portland diverges from the more typical pattern of racial justice protests over the past 2 months? Or are we looking at a response to federal provocation? Or is this a powerful gendered response? Or are we looking at good Karens and the sanctity of white motherhood?
Or can I choose D, all of the above? There's a lot happening in this moment. And as that moment is playing out in this photo, isn't there? This is a group, in the context of this photograph at least, of mostly white women in Portland, which is a mostly white city. And I think that's important to note as we talk about this image in particular and the Wall of Moms movement in general. I'm struck by the way this image performs kind of the ad hoc improvisational nature of a lot of these protest moments. These women are improvising, but they're also prepared. They've got bike helmets, they've got masks, some of them have goggles. So they seem prepared and ready, but also kind of hastily pulled together group of people. And, there's a number of things I think playing out here in the photograph that are worth thinking about. One is just that metaphor of the wall of moms. So I'm not exactly sure that a wall works or not, but if you kind of go with the narrative that mom, in US culture at least, is the primary disciplinarian of the household, then that notion of the wall of mom and not being able to get past mom, that sort of plays out here, right? But of course, we know that the feds, the troops endorsed by President Trump, have in fact been able to get past them and that they have been subject to some of the same attacks on protesters that we've seen in other contexts.
I'm concerned about the fact that racial and gender politics is becoming really complicated right now. And I fear that those complications are being stoked by the White House. From a racial standpoint, there's a group of Black moms called Mothers of the Movement. And some of the response to this photograph was that African American women and mothers are not getting the same kind of attention. Interesting comment from this woman who started the Wall of Moms group, which, by the way, is now replicating in other cities. And she said, when you have the privilege that we have as white women, you have to use it for good, and I hope that's what this is. The complexity does then throw light on white privilege, and I'm thinking about that photograph of Mark McCloskey and his wife Patricia, who is out in front of him waving their guns at protesters in St. Louis. So things are just getting so complicated. I mean, even the reference to the wall, the way it's used on the sign is also a reference back to Pink Floyd. I think it's a cultural and a musical reference that has its own kind of particularity. So, like I said, I'm concerned.
I think protest, especially in the United States, has always been fraught with complexity in terms of issues of race and gender. And to the extent that certain people, I would say primarily white people, are noticing that more, I find that interesting and valuable, that people are starting to question these sorts of things more than they have. Let's talk about some of these questions in the context of the photo itself. So one of the things I find interesting about this photograph is that the background is very dark. If you cut off the upper right third of the image, it looks almost like these women are on a stage with maybe some footlights in front of them. They're surely in the spotlight. I think it's worth exploring questions about that. Is it appropriate for a group of primarily white women to take center stage at a moment like this? And to what extent are the media honing in on the Wall of Moms because they're white and because they represent something different visually than we've seen, perhaps especially in the most recent other protests around the country? On the other hand, there are other perspectives, which is that some protesters 6 weeks ago were saying that it would be better if more white people came to the front of the protests and put themselves and their bodies on the line. That if more white people were willing to do that, then there might be more substantive change as a result. So there's a number of ways that I think this plays out. And the question is, to what extent is this women's activism valuable for its hypervisibility, or to what extent is that hypervisibility a problem?